I'm Tiffany Castagno, and I am here today with Akua and Angelica, and we want to talk to you today about leadership. So these women I have a high amount of respect for, and in our various ways, in our various journeys, we've come into being leaders and sharing knowledge in HR and leadership coaching, all of those things. And so what I want to share today is just a little bit of our journeys. That's what our hope is. And to really give you a picture into what is a leader, what is the role of a leader, and how do we each impact that? And we want to hear from you later about maybe some questions you have. So we'll each just kind of round robin our journeys, and I'll start us off. So I'm Tiffany Castagno. I am CEO of CEPHR, which is an acronym for Cultivating the Evolution of Professional HR. And so within that, I work with leaders all the time on their capabilities, building those capabilities towards building strong employer brands and cultures. So I'm an HR consultant based in Pittsburgh, originally from Milwaukee, and I help clients nationally to build those strong brands and cultures. Part of that is leadership. We know that leadership impacts engagement, retention, and leaders themselves have to be brought along the journey. And so I've worked as an HR assistant, a generalist, a business partner, HR manager, and now just launched my business. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity to really work with leaders. And I've had my own journey in various projects and sitting on boards. So that's kind of my evolution and why I'm glad to be here today. So Akua, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I always love to start off actually by spelling it out. So it's A-K-U-A. I respond to Akua. So my dad is Ghanaian. He typically refers to me as Akua. My mom is American. She typically says Akua. And for the last 5 years, I've actually lived in Lagos, Nigeria, and they typically refer to me as Akua. So I've had a really interesting, I would say, opportunity in terms of leadership. So I actually started off first as technically a co-founder of an online platform. I was sort of pushed into it. It was an opportunity that came up. I just took it and ended up really enjoying it. So I've had the opportunity to build teams, to restructure teams, to fire a lot of people, to even sort of get myself out of a job as well. And it's really what inspired me to become an executive coach about 2 years ago. So I love sort of talking about my own experience in leadership, where I was very much a reluctant leader, didn't really know what I was doing, was really too afraid to delegate. So I love sort of bringing that experience. And I also love leveraging the coaching experience that I've had as well. So I'm a certified professional coach. So I love using coaching tools and techniques, which is a lot of questioning and a lot of reflection to help leaders build their self-awareness, simplify engagement, and finally set expectations they not only achieve, but also exceed.
Amazing, thank you. Last but not least, certainly not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angelica Patlán, and I am originally from San Jose, but now live in Livermore, California. I am the creator of A New Wave of HR, and that is a brand that is focused on changing the way that HR operates and is viewed in the workplace. I want to change it through strategy, humanity, and care, which are words that are not often thought about when it comes to HR. And my goal with leadership is to really help them understand that HR should be a partner with them and should also have a voice and a role in a leadership team. And I believe that leaders don't always have to have the title. And that's something that was taught to me during my time as a public safety radio dispatcher. I've led teams of 10 to 12 officers at a time during real life emergency crisis. And so I learned through that time that you don't have to have a title to be a leader. You just need to show up and step up and really be able to adapt and be open to your team and what they're trying to teach you. So I'm excited to be here.
That's so awesome. Can we, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, because I think that's so important. I know in my intro, I touched on the different ways that I came into that, serving on a board, which was a huge pinnacle for me in being a leader, because people get so hung up on those titles. So do you mind sharing some of your experience or how you can be a leader without a title? How do you influence without that necessarily title or authority?
Yeah, so I think, oftentimes growing up, I thought a leader was authoritarian. They never showed emotion. They were strong. They were always ready to take action. And what I learned in dispatch is you really have to listen. You really have to be okay with actively listening and knowing when to say, I don't understand. In training, one of the codes that we really tried it, like it was so self-conscious, we were so afraid to say it, was 10-9, because that means repeat, please, I don't understand. And what I learned through that is it's okay to say that. It's safer to say that I don't understand what you're saying, please repeat, because then you mitigate the risk of hearing something that wasn't true and then documenting that as well. So that was a big lesson for me as a dispatcher, and also how you act in crisis. So as a dispatcher, officers aren't seeing you, they're hearing you. And that was a big lesson for me as far as how do you show up in a crisis? I don't have a leadership title, but yet these officers are looking to me as control, or, San Jose. They're looking to me for guidance and for a voice we were called like a calm voice in the storm. So I think leaders really have to be that. And whether they're a dispatcher or in corporate America, you really have to be that calm voice in the storm who is going to guide your team to, whatever goal you want to do. But it has to be one that's based in kind of poise, calmness, but also an understanding that you do need to listen to your team and what they need.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes. Do you want to add on to that?
I just wanted to say, one of the things that really struck me about what you mentioned was this idea of it being okay to ask for help when you have that title. And that's one of the things I had to learn, unfortunately, the hard way. And that's actually one of the things that I actually teach now. This idea of asking for help is not a weakness. And as someone who has a very diverse background and who typically lives in places I'm not from, I'm usually either like an expat or a foreigner. And when you're taking over a team that's from a different place, or is full of diverse people, it's also really important to be able to have those people teach you about the market that you're in. So for example, I was working on an online platform. And so a lot of my employees, a lot of my sales guys actually knew the clients a lot better than I did. And that's why I needed to default to them, right? And so there's this element of having to be open to not just getting help, but also leveraging your team that sometimes leaders need to learn the hard way. And so I really do see my role sometimes as being that person just to remind people that, okay, you don't have to learn this the hard way, but this is something that you might want to keep in mind as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really key lesson that I think leaders need to learn. And this concept of the new leader is definitely someone who is open to listening to their team, taking feedback, and delegating when necessary, especially when their team a lot of times can be the experts.
Yeah, agreed. And you mentioned, Angelica, about being, that the cops they wouldn't see you, so they would hear you. And this reminded me of a conversation I had as well with two other lovely women earlier this year. And we were talking about how in leadership, and sometimes as women or people of color, how at times you feel like you're just there to be seen and not to be heard. So part of the role of the leader, and we have all hit on this, is that your team isn't just there to just do the work. They are there to really lift you up and to amplify the work that you're doing. So some people perceive that as a threat. Oh, this person, they're on their high horse, or they have too much education, or they're showing me up in a meeting, or this idea I can't let that be just their idea, because then I'm going to look bad. And what's my boss going to think? And really, it's this shared effort of a shared vision. And leadership is not just managing people. It's not that. And so we talk about the rise of the new leader. What does that look like as a role? And it's developing your team. And I have a lot of conversations with people who struggle, a lot of leaders, with letting their team go when it's time for them to fly. And so whether that's internally or externally, hopefully we're keeping our people internally, but sometimes there are very good reasons. Maybe they have to relocate, maybe they need to care for someone. But I have tried to work with leaders and guide them and coach them around this piece, because you're doing something right if people are moving up and moving on. You want people who you have to, as one of my mentors and a former managers, you have to pull maybe rather than push. You want those motivated people. So be proud of that and celebrate that.
Oh, that's such a good point. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you hit on something, as far as leaders versus managers. And I think that's something that we still struggle with today, is there is a difference between a leader and a manager. leaders are supposed to be inspiring, empowering, and really uplifting their employees, and managers are focused on the processes. And yes, processes are important, but I think that's been the issue, at least in HR, is that we are putting processes over people, and we're just expecting people to pick up the processes and just be happy with it. And I think that is something that has to change when it comes to HR and to leadership, is, you know, putting people first. And what does that look like as a leader? And I think you've touched on it with what you said. It's that, yes, your employees may be smarter than you. They may be able to do things that you can't, and that's okay. That means that you have a good team who can teach you things that you don't know and make you a stronger leader, because you're going to learn from other people. And I think that's something that Dispatch taught me as well, is that, you know, you can find lessons and leaders in any rank of the organization. You can find people who will teach you things that you never expected. And we had people who had been dispatchers for years who taught me some of the greatest lessons, but then I also learned things from newer dispatchers who, you know, had a fresh eye for things that maybe other people didn't. And so I think there is a need to focus on, are you leading people, or are you just trying to manage them? Because that will make a difference in the effectiveness and the productivity of your team.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a bit of both is necessary, right? So when to sort of shift to being more of that manager and focus a little bit more on the process, versus recognizing that you do need that vision, you do need to lead, and you do need to be inspiring in some elements, right? That is also something I think that the new leader does really well. They know when to leverage those different tools and techniques.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, for anyone who wants this, but what do you think gets in the way, or what in your experience? I think we've touched on a few of those things, people being afraid that, you know, they're intimidated by someone being smarter, or they're going to get the credit, or maybe they're just afraid, or they're not self-aware. But what else gets in the way? What else do you feel like gets in the way for people?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And when I start to work with clients, especially ones that are working with teams, I love to ask them, you know, what are their references? What models do they have for leadership and managers? So I would actually say that a lot of the behaviors are actually just passed down. That's just what they've seen, and that's sometimes all they know. But just because you've seen it, just because that's all you know, it doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities there. And that's where I think people like us come in, right? So whether it's through creating content, being an HR consultant, or coming in as a leadership expert or coach, we can provide these different perspectives so people can recognize that there's a different way. And once again, right, when you're thinking about a leader or manager, there needs to be different things in your toolkit. Sometimes you do need to be a disciplinarian. Sometimes you do need to focus on those processes. Other times you do need to be a little bit more inspiring. So it's just about understanding when to turn it on and off, I would say. But I do think a lot of it is learned behavior. A lot of it just comes from, you know, when you are in fear, or you are like, you know, yeah, it's simply, yeah, it's just your reaction, I think, a lot of times, right? But another thing that we can do as humans is that, okay, we can recognize that we're anxious, or we can recognize that we're fearful. We can intercept that thought and change our behavior. So it's recognizing like, oh, I'm doing this because I'm being triggered. Maybe there's something about my values here that's happening that I don't like, but I can also change my behavior once I get a different perspective and can recognize that I can do something different.
Anything to add, Angelica?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just said. I think it's so important to be self-aware, and I think that's something that a lot of leaders are missing. You know, you have the ability to unlearn things, and just because something was done in the past doesn't mean it has to be continued in the future. And I think that's something that a lot of leaders struggle with, is this feeling of, well, that's the way we've always done it, so that's the way we're going to continue to do it. But, you know, just because you've done it that way doesn't mean it's the right way. And sometimes you do have to unlearn those things. You do have to take the time to self-reflect. Are you bringing things from your past, whether it be a traumatic experience with a supervisor? Are you bringing that experience now into your current leadership role? I think that's a big thing, is we have to kind of heal and recognize how the past has shaped us, but not allow it to continue to influence the way that we interact with others. And I think that that's a big thing, is that, you know, cycle. Are you continuing the same type of leadership that you didn't like, but yet you experienced it, so now I'm going to do it to you kind of mentality? I think that's something that I've seen a lot as well. I had to deal with it, so now you're going to have to deal with it too. And it's just this continuation. And so we have to be able to be self-aware to break that up. Like, yes, this happened to you. You didn't like it. Why are we continuing this now? Or maybe you're encountering somebody who is very different than you, and you're feeling those feelings of, oh, they're just, you know, they're aggressive. They're, you know, what's the word that comes up? You know, they talk back, they're smart aleck. Well, are they really? Or is that your internal kind of like trauma, or some things you've experienced outside of work, maybe personally growing up? Is that something that's coming from within you that's affecting your leadership? So I think self-awareness and self-reflection are super important to this new leader to be able to move past the past and kind of come into the future.
Well said. You know, right. And I had this conversation too, like, you're challenging. I've been through this walk and I've had that, and it's this is how I learn best. So understand how your team learns best. There is not a one size fit all. It's going to be different individually. And those people on your team, when they go out and they collaborate with other folks out in the business, they're probably going to bring some new ideas back. So we talked about not being stuck in your ways. And the bane of my existence is, well, that's how we always did it. We tried that. That's not going to work. Well, how do you know? And it's looking at things with an open mind and not being afraid to try. And a lot of this is derived from fear, because people don't want to try new things, or they're afraid it's going to make them look bad. And I think, you know, when you put people first and you look at it from that aspect, one of the things that I always share too is, when you talk about a brand, just like an employer has a brand, just like a product has a brand, leadership has its brand, right? I think we all can agree there. And it's why we love what we do. But what is the brand that you want to create? And that's within your team as well as within the organization. So you don't want a team who no one wants to collaborate with, or you've handed down these, you know, kind of marching orders, and now they're afraid to make a move. They don't take any initiative. They're not proactive. They're not engaged. You don't even retain them. So a host of issues comes along with this. So it's putting people first. And the other thing I would say too is, people first, but understanding that processes can be broken too. And when we talk about not doing things the same way, and seeking to understand, assuming positive intent, it's not accusing your employees of things. Just because something didn't work out doesn't mean it's their fault. And so that with me is huge. And I work on those capabilities with leaders as well, because it doesn't always come intuitively to people. So any other thoughts around that, or anything else we've shared? Anything you want to wrap up with?
I think for me,
so much to talk about.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just simply going to add, like, what I really appreciate about what you just shared, Tiffany, is this idea of starting with ourselves first, right? It's so much easier when you recognize sometimes those gaps within yourself and then see it in others. And that's why I love, once again, the things that all of us are doing, because it's all about us also reflecting and being like, wait, we could have done that differently. And that's why it's so much easier for us to be able to share, to empathize, and provide resources and tools and techniques to others. It really starts with you first. As a leader, if you expect someone to do X, Y, and Z, really reflect on, I think both of us, all of us touched on this, like where that really comes from, right? Are you asking them to do it just because? Does it really make sense to the bottom line? Does it really make sense to the greater vision? Where is it really coming from? And another thing that I find myself talking a little bit more about these days is also this idea of unconscious biases. And I think it's really fascinating, because I do live in Africa, right? So for the most part, a lot of the people I work with do, for the most part, have a similar skin color to me. But there are other biases that we don't always think of. Accent, right? So that's a really big one that I get because of how I sound. Yet I live someplace else, right? Even how people do their hair, the way they look. So really recognizing as a leader, or even just as a human being, that we do have these unconscious biases. We do jump to these stereotypes and these conclusions just based on some of these superficial things. And it's really important that we check ourselves, right? So once again, as human beings, we have this amazing ability to have thoughts, but we can intercept those thoughts and change our behaviors and ultimately change our results as well.
Love that. Love it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the only thing that I would add is just leaders have to be okay with saying sorry. That's something that I really dealt with as an employee. I had a supervisor tell me, well, I never say sorry. It's not personal, it's business. And I don't have to say sorry as the leader. And, I think we have to get past that as the new leader. You need to be able to understand that some things are not your team's fault. Some things are not just an employee's, just past discretion or fault. Sometimes we as leaders need to be able to understand and own our actions. And it's okay to say sorry. I think, especially as women and women of color, sometimes we say sorry too much. So I think we have to be able to kind of balance that out. But as leaders, we need to be able to say, okay, that was my action. This is why it went wrong. Here's how it affected my team, and here's how I can move forward. Because if not, then you're just continuing that same cycle of leadership where it's, well, I told you to do this, you didn't do it right. So now it's, now it's your problem. And we have to continue cultivating that culture of, no, this is, a team ownership. This is how we're going to move forward as a team.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like you don't want to create these punitive cultures. And I've experienced some of that directly in my own employment relationships and employee life cycle. And I've seen leaders who do that. And so I think all of us are here to do the right thing. I know that we are, but we're all here to help with this, because it can be a challenge. And sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, but that's where that self-awareness, that checking the unconscious bias at the door, that being open, assuming positive intent, all of those things. And it's okay to put some new tools in your tool belt. None of us have all of those right now. And that's why we're always I'm a lifelong learner. And so I'm not going to assume that what I know today is what I'm going to know tomorrow. I sure hope it's not. That would be very boring. And so it's growth, and it's taking that accountability and showing your team, like, this is how you lead the way. And you don't have to have all the answers, but transparency as well, and being there for them, visible. And I always am a fan of the leader who has their team's back. As leaders, we have to be the buffer for our team. And some people get uncomfortable with that and they're not willing to do that. But I always say, do what's right and the rest will follow. So that's all I have. Anything else, ladies, before we head out?
I don't think so. I really like the way this conversation has sort of ended, just really this importance of reflection and self-awareness. I think that's really that number one piece of the new leader. They're open to questioning their own initial thoughts, open and, to shifting their thoughts. And I think ultimately that will change their results, and they'll get much better results, I think, with their teams that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any golden nuggets you'd like to leave us with, Angelica?
I think that as leaders, we can all be leaders. So even if you don't have a title right now, if you're in between jobs, if you're not in a leadership title, that doesn't mean that you don't have the capability to be a leader within your team. So I really encourage everyone to think about how they can be a leader, whether they're or not they have a title, and what that would look like for them in their daily lives.
Thanks, ladies. I'm so glad that we spent this time together. It's always a delight. And I just think the world of both of you, both personally and professionally. And we're both 2020 gifts. So I'm very grateful for you both and your wisdom that you shared with everyone. So with that being said, we'll wrap up here, and you can find any of us on LinkedIn. We're all very active there. So we'll look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, you have some thoughts, you want to share some stories about good leadership or examples of maybe when it could have been improved, maybe it wasn't done right, feel free to share those as well. We will be posting this video, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Any other thoughts, ladies, that you want to part with?
No, thank you both so much. Yeah, for this time.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.